Hello there, and a warm welcome to all of you time travelers that have made it to your We Love History Live event. Currently being hosted in the medieval world of Robert the Bruce, an event enhanced with surprisingly far advanced technology for the day. This is the year of our Lord 1329. Our capital city is Perth, where there is no electricity and no internet, except for this one special day. My name is Bishop James Bane, and it is my absolute honour to present to you His Grace, Robert the Bruce, King of the Scots, who I have here with me today. Our King has graciously agreed to answer many of the questions that we hear flying around your kingdom. So, if you have any questions that for His Grace, send them using your Book of Faces or Facebook, or by using a YouTube account, whatever that means, and we will endeavour to ask King Robert as many as we're able to. Okay, Your Grace, a really easy question to get us started, and that is, where were you born?
The first question, no holding back there then, James. So I was born in Turnberry Castle, as you well know. Turnberry Castle is my mother's home castle, the ancestral home of the Earls of Carrick. But the place of my birth has been questioned before, and it's accidentally perhaps, or deliberately, mixed up with the birthplace of my father. He, of course, was born in Essex, which is in England, and people question that and question my loyalty to Scotland. I don't think it matters where a man is born. Absolutely. I think it's more important where and how he chooses to live.
A superlative answer, Your Grace. Okay, and the second question, we're moving straight to a question here from Hamish from Dalkeith. And the second question, a wee bit contentious here, Your Grace, is by what right do you claim to be king?
By right of my blood. There's no contention there. As I just said, my mother is from the castle and an ancient princess of Gaeldom. She traces her ancestry to David I, through the Earl of Huntingdon, who was, of course, brother of Malcolm IV and William the Lion. During the succession of 1290, my father came forth and claimed right to the crown, and he was superseded by John Balliol. And of course, that was the right thing to do, because Balliol was descended from an older sister than my family. But John Balliol was not a good man to be king. He wasn't fit to even to run his own household. He was a fourth-born son, never given the skills or the training to run his father's home. And of course, when his father died, and his first elder brother, and his second elder brother, and his third elder brother, all having expensive funerals, they ended up in quite a lot of debt, the Balliol family. And Balliol turned to his wife and asked her how he was going to sort this out. And they resolved the problem by borrowing money from her cousin. Now that sounds like a good plan, but her cousin was the King of England. From the first day he sat on the Scottish throne, John Balliol was in debt to the King of England. And once he showed himself to be Edward's man, he was no longer fit to be King of Scots. By might and by unifying Scotland behind me, I was the right choice for King of Scots.
Thank you, Your Grace, and hopefully that's answered many questions that the subjects of your kingdom have had. So remember, people of Scotland and beyond, this might be the only chance that you get to ask your king a question. So remember, you can ask questions. We've been reliably informed in the live chat. So send us your questions, please. And coming straight from the scriptorium, we have a few that we prepared earlier. Okay, so from the Book of Faces Facebook, we have Colin Martin. Colin Martin, one of your subjects, Your Grace, has written in to ask, were you disappointed at the English response after Bannockburn?
Yes. If I could have made it different, I would. But their response was not a terrible surprise to me. And of course, I was ready for it, and I tried to make the best of that situation. So in the same year that the Battle of Bannockburn took place, I held parliaments. I offered my enemies within Scotland, because I still had them after that great victory, I offered them the opportunity to come back into my peace. Even men like William de Soules, who I made Lord of Liddesdale in 1314. He was a former enemy, and I showed him peace, and he came back to me. It was my dearest wish that all of the people, all of the magnates of Scotland would unite together to oppose England and stop them from ever coming back here to bother my people.
Thank you, Your Grace. And Colin, hopefully that's answered that question. Another one from Facebook, and that's from Andrew Budd. And Andrew, we hope that His Grace has answered the question that you asked. Could you please settle it once and for all? Were you born in Scotland or Essex? So hopefully that's answered that. A message from Al Ross on Facebook. Would you have accepted Edward's decision if the Bruces had been chosen instead of the Comyn? So I think a wee bit of confusion there, Your Grace. I'm not sure whether Al is saying the Bruces instead of the Baliol.
Yes, the Comyn are Baliol men. John Baliol was the right choice by lineage, as I already said, but he was not fit to be the King of Scots. And the Commons were even less so, further removed from the crown. Their branch of the royal family is so far distant, I can't even remember which ancient king it is they claim to be descended from. They are on the periphery of the royal family tree. And if, as is the case, they claim the right to rule through John Baliol, he proved himself to be unworthy, and therefore the Commons, along with him, should never be near the throne. So no, the decision of Edward to put Baliol on the throne was right by lineage, but wrong for Scotland. And Edward typically acted in self-interest.
Thank you, Your Grace. Thank you. Another question come in from John McNichol, and that's, why did you not control your brother Edward Bruce in Ireland, knowing his style?
Control Edward Bruce. Well, with a lead, keep him on a leash. My brother was a great warrior, ferocious in battle, and remember, by 1318, High King of Ireland. It's not the place of the King of Scots to tell the King of Ireland how to behave, any more than it is the place of the King of England to tell me how to behave. My brother was my little brother, but by the point he ruled Ireland, he was my equal.
Thank you, Your Grace. Thank you, great question there, John. One come in from something called Twitter, and that's Morris Gordy, who asks, did you ever paint your face for war?
Painting faces is an ancient thing in Scotland. I've never done it myself, but when I was growing up at Turnberry Castle, my mother and father paid for tutors, and one of my tutors taught me of this. They used a thing called woad, and you may see it around my castles in Scotland today. Probably more likely to be in the Weavers Guild, as they use it to dye wool now. It's a nice blue colour. But in ancient times, warriors painted themselves with it, painted their bodies with it, because it had some kind of medicinal benefit, and they thought that wounds that were received on the blue parts would heal more quickly and more perfectly. You're unlikely to find it in an apothecary today. But the ancient tradition of painting yourself before battle comes from the times when the Romans walked in this land, before Scotland even existed, and the people were called the Picts by the Romans.
From the Latin picti, which
painted people.
Painted people. Brilliant. Thank you, Your Grace. And I must say that your grasp of Latin is excellent, with French being high in the list of what you're able to speak. Okay, another question here. We've got Paul on Facebook. Did you actually have leprosy? So do you have leprosy, Your Grace? Or?
Of course not. I wouldn't be sitting this close to you now.
No, absolutely not. Okay, so he asked, did you find a cure for your leprosy?
To the best of my knowledge, the only cure for leprosy is praying. And that's important to me. I have been unwell in my life all through the last 2 decades, since the Battle of Inverurie, where I first took ill. But it's not leprosy. There's no way I could have achieved all I have done, which would require me to be close to people, close to my soldiers, close to my other commanders, close to people in my royal court. If I had leprosy, they would shun me. It's very contagious. There's no evidence of me ever having leprosy or anyone catching it from me. It's a ridiculous thing. Much like me being born in Essex, it's a story put around by my enemies. My affliction, though, I believe, comes from God. It's a curse placed upon me when I was excommunicated for what happened on that day at Greyfriars Kirk.
Yes, and while we're on the subject of Greyfriars Kirk, there are quite a few questions coming in concerning some of the scurrilous rumours that are abounding in this land that you may have murdered John Comyn in the Greyfriars Kirk. How do you respond to that, Your Grace?
John Comyn's ghost haunts me still, James. There's barely a day goes by when I don't think about him. It would be much better for me to have John Comyn as an ally. Can you imagine after the death of Edward I in 1307, when his son took 3 years to organise himself and come to Scotland to face me and me alone? Can you imagine? He would never dared show his face if Comyn had been by my side. I will not speak of what happened on that day, but I offered John Comyn my peace. I wanted him to work with me. He should have been by my side. As I said earlier, his claim to the throne was ruined when Balliol sold out to become an underling of Edward. To have the English king and dominion over us, if the Commons claimed the right to the throne through Balliol, they would equally hand Scotland over to Edward. I couldn't allow it. I told John Comyn to support me. There could be no one but a Bruce king on the throne. He agreed, and then he changed his mind. And it was unacceptable, so I had to deal with it.
Yes, it's unfortunate times, but I believe it was one of my fellow bishops that absolved you of blood guilt. That was Bishop Wishart of Glasgow. Is that right?
Yes, Wishart blessed me almost immediately. He was by my side, and it was him, actually, not Lamberton, but Wishart, who came to me and he said, perhaps things would be easier if the nobility was more like the church. You, of course, have not inherited your position from your father. You were elected to the bishopric of St Andrews. And maybe if the people of Scotland could choose their king, choose me, choose my successor, then maybe things would be fairer and there would be less civil war between magnates.
Indeed. And this does link into a meeting that my predecessor, Bishop Lamberton, had with Duns Scotus, the Scottish philosopher, who did say perhaps it should be the people that choose a king, not primogeniture, and not because he has some metal on his head proclaiming him king. Perhaps it's up to the people, which is why you're referred to as Robert Bruce, King of Scots, rather than King of Scotland. Is that correct?
The land belongs to God.
Indeed.
I am the king of the nation, the king of the people, not the king of the land.
So unfortunately, because we only have Wi-Fi for today, and the rest of the time is non-existent in the year 1329, we may not get through all of your questions. If you're worried that we might not get to answer your question, please leave them in a comment instead, and we'll do our very best to get back to you with an answer via carrier pigeon, providing that the hungry troops haven't eaten, because you do have some hungry troops under your command, don't you, Grace? Okay, another question then. We have, you were an expert tactician in hit-and-run techniques, often beating your enemies and capturing our castles back using subterfuge and daring, instead of committing to open battle against your enemies who were fighting for King Edward I and King Edward II. What changed with Bannockburn, and were you confident with victory as the battle progressed?
No one is ever confident of victory in battle, James. And as for expert, my skills were forged in war over decades. If I had the knowledge and the skills I have now when I first put the crown upon my head in 1306, many of my comrades would still be alive. I learned the hard way. From the Battle of Methven, when I first fought Amir de Valence, and he showed me what English chivalry was. He left my army in tatters. With a mere 500 men, there was no option to stand in battle and fight the English toe-to-toe. We had to adapt or lose. We had to adapt and come up with a new way of fighting. And it wasn't that new. Wallace had done it before me, and he'd done it successfully. So that was why we used these hit-and-run tactics. And then later, even before Bannockburn, once I'd begun to bring the nobles of Scotland back to my cause, we began to amass men again. We began to have more than hundreds. We began to start with armies of thousands. And in that period I mentioned earlier, when Edward II first came to the crown, he took a long time to come to Scotland. And we were able to train, to practice, and I had time to think and to strategize. I figured out that the only way to beat the English was to fight them on a battleground of my choosing. That was the difference at Bannockburn. And of course, that was also the difference at Loudon Hill, where I'd had an opportunity to practice the tactics I used at Bannockburn, where I managed to reduce the number of English that could come at me at once by narrowing the battlefield, by choosing the site, and of course by holding the high ground to get the English to charge uphill to slow down their heavy horse. Bannockburn worked differently, but it was actually the same tactic. You need to slow down the horses, and they slowed down in the swamps and the bog around the burn at Bannockburn.
Thank you, Your Grace. And Brother Bob from the Scriptorium will hand me the next series of questions that are coming in through the Book of Faces. This is from the YouTube, which can be misconstrued as an insult, but from somebody called Kelly. So if you were alive way, way, way in the future, in the year of our Lord 2020, so that's 700 years, would you consider Dunfermline a town or a city?
Dunfermline's a city. It has a cathedral. As long as the cathedra is in the cathedral, it is a city.
Thank you, Your Grace. Yes, and thank you, Kelly, for the question. A message here from Sue on the YouTube again, and it's a question from her 4-year-old son. Was fighting Henry de Bohun at the Battle of Bannockburn your greatest victory in single combat? That's a great question, son of Sue.
Henry de Bohun was a hothead. He risked his life to try to take mine, and it cost him his life. But at least he had the decency and honesty to fight me face to face and toe to toe. He gave me a chance to defend myself, unlike others who would sneak upon me in the night. Henry de Bohun is a famous victory of mine. I won many times at jousting, but Henry was the one that I killed in single combat, and that is nothing to be proud of. Being skillful enough to see his charge coming, and nimble of mind and fleet of foot on my pony to maneuver myself out of the way gave me the advantages. But being able to maneuver myself into that position for my axe stroke, I am proud of it, but it was not my greatest victory.
Okay, Grace, thank you. And hopefully that's answered your question there. Son of Sue, or my son. Okay, so again from the Book of Faces, there's Joanne in a place called Florida, which I believe might be just outside Glasgow. Did your father have leprosy?
No.
Thank you. Okay, a question here on YouTube from Elizabeth. A couple of questions, but do you think Balliol deserves the nickname Tomb Tabard, which is, of course, empty coat?
It happened to Balliol that he was stripped of the regalia of the Scottish monarch. And so, yes, for that reason, the nickname is earned. He allowed himself to be manipulated into a position where he was called to the court of Edward of England for financial debts owed to a mere wine merchant. I mean, who hasn't got wine debts?
Exactly, Your Grace.
But as I said earlier, as a fourth-born son, John Balliol probably never received the training how to manage his finances, manage his household, command his men and his servants. I don't entirely blame John Balliol for what happened to him, but a stronger man would never ever have been in that situation in the first place. I mean, he followed a woman, for goodness sake. He asked his wife what to do about his debt, and it was her that told him to borrow from her cousin.
Indeed. Some people would say that the main power in a household is, of course, the wife of the Lord.
Only when he's not there.
When he's away fighting, she's in charge of the household. From Facebook, we've got Sue in a place called Chicago, I think Chicago. Don't know if I'm pronouncing that properly. Why were you and William Wallace rivals?
Wallace and I were never rivals. I supported Wallace. He was a great man. Unlike the Commons, he fought for Scotland. The Commons fought for themselves and for their kinsmen, but Wallace fought to free all of the people of this nation. If you ever met him, James, he had a presence about him. People liked him. People wanted to help him. That's what it takes to lead armies. That's what it takes to lead an army to a great victory, such as the one he and Andrew de Murray achieved at Stirling Bridge, outnumbered against the English. And clever tactics too, mind you, to wait till half the English were on their side of the river and then attack. Only a great man could achieve that, and William Wallace was a great man. I was never his rival. He was never my rival. He's not of royal blood. But the Commons and the Balliols, who Wallace supported, were in it for themselves. Wallace was in it for the people of Scotland.
Thank you, Wallace. And hopefully in Chicago that's answered your question, Sue. On YouTube, we've got a question from Olivier, and they ask, where were you crowned?
In 1306, at Scone Palace. It was a fantastic day, and your predecessor, Bishop Lamberton, Bishop of St Andrews, orchestrated the whole thing. An event, a ceremony that Edward of England tried to prevent from happening by taking away the regalia, the crown, the holy rod, everything, the stone of destiny, everything associated with Scottish coronations. And Lamberton, and through the ancestral memory of the Palace of Scone, the people who worked there put together a fantastic ceremony where they had me coronated and the crown placed on my head, not by the Earl of Macduff, but by his sister. It was a fabulous day.
Thank you, Your Grace. And of course, His Grace is referring to Isabella Macduff, who placed the crown on, thus fulfilling the tenet set down by Malcolm III after the long protracted fighting against King Macbeth. And it was the Macduff that may or may not have delivered the killing blow to Macbeth. And that's why Malcolm III decreed that it would always be a Macduff placing the crown on the king's head. A very strange question. I don't really understand the word, but on Facebook we have Joe asking, Your Highness, so Your Grace, what is your tartan?
Tartan.
Tartan, yes.
You mean like the clansmen wear?
The weave. Yes, those Highlanders that you spent time with hiding.
The Hebrideans and the Islanders wear it as well,
Right,
but it is more common to the Gaels of the north of Scotland. Norman knights like myself would seldom wear a plaid or tartan. Plaid, of course, is a Gaelic word for blanket, and the plaids that they wear can be used as blankets. They're a large piece of material. They wrap themselves up in it, and it will keep them warm at night. It will keep them dry when they're out tending their cattle. They're great when you're on campaign because they save you from having to carry bedding, but there are no specific tartans for anyone specifically. As I mentioned earlier, plants are used to dye wools, and the colours of regional tartans, if you like, come from the plants that grow there locally. So you maybe find different colours in the south around Annandale and Carrick than you would in somewhere maybe further north in places like Dingwall in the lands of Ross. But as such, there's no regimental or organised system of tartan.
Unlike the heraldry which His Grace is wearing, that would immediately identify which family he belonged to, whether on or off the battlefield. And of course, he's wearing the lion rampant, the royal regalia of Scotland, to demonstrate that, well, you tell him, Your Grace. It's me answering your questions.
With the double flory counter flory.
Exactly, Your Grace.
And it is the double treasure flory counter flory that marks the royal family of Scotland. So you will see it on heraldry of people such as my nephew, Thomas Randolph, or my sister's husband, Christopher Seaton.
And again, linking into the Macduffs and their connection to the crown, then it would be the lion rampant without the surround there that would demonstrate to everybody that they were connected to the crown, but not quite as important. So Bob from the scriptorium is furiously trying to get my attention. And another scroll just in from the carrier pigeons. Okay, so where are we? A question here from a nice one, a great question from Martin on Facebook. And Martin asks, what sort of games did you play growing up?
Games, you mean like rough games like Kingibat?
Exactly.
That teach you agility. So Kingibat is where the squires are put in the middle and all of the knights form a circle around them and then throw rocks at them. It teaches you agility because you need to get out of the way of the rocks. It teaches you tolerance for pain if you're too slow to do that. And it also lets you know whether your sponsor, your knight, likes you or not, because quite often if they do like you, they will give you a shield. I played games like that. Of course, I played games like Heffentafel. My father was a great fan of strategy and board games. This is much like the game chess, so it's played on a board with pieces, but it's a Viking game, and you have one king and a lot of soldiers. One side attacks the king with his soldiers, and the other side defends from the attackers. And it's great fun, and I won more than I lost against my brothers.
Excellent, Oliver. And again, the game Heffentafel would have been introduced with the peoples of the Scandinavian countries that occupied the north and west coasts for a long time until King Alexander III eventually managed to push King Hakon back with his Viking fleets after the disastrous Battle of Largs. Disastrous for both sides as there was no clear victor. But following that was the Treaty of Perth, wasn't it, where the Scottish territories were handed, or the outer islands, the Hebrides, were handed back to Scotland's control, where Orkney and Shetland were kept under the control of the Norwegians. Thank you, Your Grace. A great question, another one here in from Frobromi on YouTube. What food and drinks did you have? And what would your favourite thing to eat or drink be?
I love venison. I keep my huntsmaster busy hunting deer for me. It is my favourite food. Absolutely, without shadow of a doubt. And washed down with a nice mead. I've tried wine, it's a bit fancy for me, but a good strong mead or an ale to go with it is perfect for me. Some people in my lands and in times when I have been on campaign, I've eaten vegetables, I've eaten with peasants, I've gone hungry. I've eaten things like peas pottage, which is like porridge with vegetables through it. I would not eat it by choice. But in Scotland, we're blessed with bountiful lands, and in the summer campaign months, quite often we could live on berries and fruits from the trees as well. I like fruits, but they're better when they're stewed. So something like pears stewed in red wine after my venison, or even with it, would be nice. I'm not a fan of wild boar. It's quite fatty, and also much more dangerous to hunt. Of course, you can hunt deer from horseback using bows and arrows, but the boar traditionally is hunted with a spear, and you have to stand in front of the thing, and they are quite dangerous, quite big, and quite nasty tusks.
Yeah, oh yes, definitely rigorous. That's why we send
The huntsman, yeah.
Thank you, Your Grace. And we've been asked if, Your Grace, you could say hello to 4-year-old Ewan. Ewan, who is a huge fan.
Hi, Ewan. How are you? I hope you're enjoying this event. I hope you can hear me.
Okay, I know it's very strange talking to a wee box instead of like a real live person. But I'm sure Ewan would love to know the word on the track, all of the rumours going around. Was there an attempt on your life, like an assassination attempt?
Was there one, or was there many? We already talked of one. It wasn't an assassination. There was no subtlety to it. But Henry de Bohun definitely tried to kill me.
Hothead Henry.
Many times in battle. Had I been captured, I knew I would have suffered the same fate as Wallace and my brothers. There was no opportunity, no likelihood that the King of England would ever do anything other. But in 1320, people from my own kingdom did try to assassinate me.
Really?
The conspirators, or chief amongst them, was William de Soules. And I mentioned him earlier. After Bannockburn, I made him Lord of Liddesdale. He was welcomed back into my peace. After my brother died in 1318, I had no heir. Thankfully, since then, my wife has borne me a son, and I have an heir once again. But at that time in 1318, the kingdom was under threat. And I knew that if I was aware of that, my enemies were aware of that within Scotland and outside Scotland. So I tried to bind some of them closer to me. And again, William de Soules, who had done nothing wrong other than be on the wrong side. He'd supported Balliol and then gone into Edward's army. I'd given him the lands, the lordship of Liddesdale, and I made him my butler in 1318. I thought it would be enough. I thought he could be my friend. Much like John Comyn, I knew Scotland would be better with our lords and our magnates working together. Mm-hmm. But it seems all I did was give him access to me, and he and his conspirators planned to kill me after I had sent the letter of our oath to the Pope. And when that letter was on its way to the Pope that I found out. Patrick, Earl of Dunbar, came back from France in a big hurry, and he told me of the conspiracy. I was able to round some of the men up, Soules amongst them. And yet again, I didn't have him executed. I put him in prison. I hoped he would see the error of his ways. I still, even then, hoped that he would come to my side. But in truth, he probably wasn't the true power behind the conspiracy. We spoke earlier of the necessity of different tactics, non-conventional warfare. And this is non-conventional. And it was probably in 1319, in September of that year, after we'd taken Berwick back and shunned Edward II as he laid siege to it, sent him back to his own kingdom
to think again,
to sort out his own nobles who were in almost open rebellion. Mm-hmm. Some of his nobles in the north were my friends, more likely to allow me safe passage through their lands than their own king, because when I attacked the north of England and they asked Edward for help, he did nothing. But Edward in 1319 was not in a position to send his army into Scotland again. Had he done that, had he come here, his enemies within his own kingdom would have usurped him. He would have lost everything. And that forced him to a position where he had to use non-conventional warfare. And I believe it was him that was the power behind de Soules and his conspirators. And thank God that Patrick of Dunbar found out and came to tell me, because without him, I would probably be dead by now.
Yes, thank you to Patrick of Dunbar as well, and thank you, God. And thank you for the question. Okay, we have from Facebook, we have Stuart. And Stuart asks a great question, Your Grace. I know you're going to love this one. How many weapons have you got, and which is your favourite?
I have lots of weapons. I had a favourite axe once, but I broke it on Henry de Bohun's head. The axe is a great weapon because I like the weight of it. If you use a sword, you really need to cut through your opponent, whereas with an axe, you can cut with the blade or smash just with the weight of it. Even if you just break someone's bones, break their arm, break their legs, if they've got a broken arm, they can't swing their weapon at you. If they've got a broken leg, they can't run after you on a battlefield. So heavy weapons like the axe is what I prefer to fight with. Of course, when it comes to arming and equipping my men, after my brother died in 1318, in the Parliament of St Andrews that year, I issued decrees telling men what they must bring to war, and chief amongst them was the spear. The spear is the greatest weapon. We used it successfully at Bannockburn when we formed our Shiltrons. We used it successfully at Loudon Hill. It is a great weapon for Scots to use because wood is in abundance here, and it is very effective against the heavy horse, and the chief weapon of England. So yes, the spears were stockpiled at that point because, as I said during the last question, I still thought there was threat from England and I expected it to be military.
Well done, you guys, thank you. Now there is some witchcraft afoot here. I think we have spies in the court. On YouTube, there is a message here from an Emma Knox, and she asks, my son Charlie is asking, where is your heart? Well, it's quite obviously in your chest, Your Grace. However, yes, she may be using scrying to find out the plans that you've been discussing with your innermost circle of what you plan to do when you are gone, Your Grace.
Well, it should still remain a secret. but I guess it probably doesn't matter this late in the day. I said earlier that John Comyn haunts me still, and he does. When Wishart absolved me of my sins in the immediacy of Comyn's death, I promised to go on crusade. But because I've been pestered by two Edwards, I've never had the opportunity to do it. Just like Edward's kingdom would have been under threat had he come north after 1319, my kingdom would ever be under threat had I left it. I had to stay here and keep Scotland safe from two Edwards of England. So my plan when I die, whenever that may be, is to have my trusted lieutenant, my second in command, James Douglas, take my heart from my chest and carry it on crusade. If I cannot make penance for my sins, I will have Douglas carry my heart to the Holy Lands and do it for me.
It's just too awful a concept now. Hopefully people will write some nice questions. Yes, thank you, Emma Knox, for that question. Thank you, Bob, from the scriptorium. Okay, Bob, we really need to work on your writing. Honestly, my eyes aren't what they once were. Okay, your guild mistress would not have been impressed when you were growing up, would she? Okay, a question here from a Margaret Ann on Facebook. What achievements as King of Scots are you most proud of? Great question, Margaret Ann. Thank you.
The one I achieved this last year, the one I've striven for my entire life, the one that leaves this kingdom at peace. Last year, in 1328, we signed the Treaty of Edinburgh-Northampton between myself and, it was the regent of the King of England. But there will be no more war between us. Finally, they have recognised the Bruce kings. My son will inherit a land free of trouble. He'll be surrounded by his nobles, Sir Thomas Randolph, Sir James Douglas, who will help him in his early years, teach him, as my father taught me, how to run his household and how to run his kingdom, and then help him manage this kingdom. But more than that, he's named David, probably after our greatest ever king, David I. He ruled in a time of peace. He organised the kingdom. He enhanced the kingdom. Even greater than Alexander III, who was a friend of the King of England, and achieved peace that way. I hope David can be friends with Edward III and achieve perpetual peace for Scotland.
Thank you, Your Grace. And earlier on, you alluded to letters from Arbroath. Do they rank up there as well as something you're proud of?
The letter of Arbroath to the Pope finally got me recognised by the papacy as the King of Scots. It was important to achieve that as a message to Edward in England that he was no longer at liberty to come here and to fight with me. And that was important. But I think, as I just said, the Treaty of Northampton-Edinburgh, the peace between myself and Edward III and his regent, the perpetual peace that my son will inherit is by far greater and far more important. The people of these lands, it's 1329, the people of these lands have been at war for nigh on 40 years, for most of us our entire lives. So to finally have peace and to be able to look forward to our relationship with England that will be a peaceful and a friendly one, as Alexander III had, is my greatest ever achievement.
And God willing. And thank you, Margaret Ann. Great question. Okay, a message here from Nancy on Facebook. And please tell us about your education and what subjects did you study?
My education, so long ago, in Turnberry, I had 2 scholars. Normally you would only have one, but my mother insisted that I have one who could teach me Gaelic, and he was the one who taught me about the Picts in ancient Scotland. My father insisted that I learn Latin and French, of course, for speaking at court in England as well as in Scotland. I also learned strategies and warfare. I practiced weapons every day from the age of 12. I looked after my own armour, even though I had a squire. When I was a squire, I looked after my own armour and learned how to look after these things. And of course, not only did I learn to speak all of those languages, I've been taught to read and write, as Bob has been doing, in English, in Scots, in Gaelic, and in Latin.
So, very varied education. A strange one here from a downhill racer on YouTube. Yeah. He calls you your lord, but he doesn't know the way. It's your grace, actually. He says, I am a new Yorker, so I don't know what an old Yorker is, because we've been to York, haven't we, your grace?
Yes.
Whose family is part of the Macduff clan. We keep hearing about an illustrious ancestor of ours, Isabella Macduff. Can you tell us more, please?
Isabella was the lady who placed the crown on my head. She was a fantastic woman, and her service to me got her in trouble with Edward. I tried to keep her safe with my own bride and my own daughter. When I came back to Scotland in 1307, I sent them north with my brothers, thinking they would be safe further away from England. And they took sanctuary in a church, the Collegiate Church in Tain. I visited it as recently as last year. But the English, or their mercenary friends here in Scotland, broke down the door and broke that sanctuary and captured my wife Elizabeth de Burgh and your ancestor Isabella Macduff. And they were hung in cages along with my daughter from cages around castles in England. It's a terrible, terrible thing to have done to a woman for simply putting a crown on my head. And I owe her, as much as I owe Wishart, my campaign into the Holy Lands. She will be rewarded.
Thank you, Your Grace. Well, Your Grace, I think that's getting close to all we've got time for. If there's any final things you'd like to say at all?
Not particularly, James. I think you've done well. Your readings come on a long way.
Thank you very much, Your Grace.
I'd like to thank everyone for their
Bob's
questions.
writing, like
They're interesting questions. And I hope that if you haven't had your questions answered, we may find time to do that. But other than that, I've enjoyed this session. It's brought up some painful memories, but a lot of happy ones too.
Well, thank you very much, Your Grace. And as King Robert said, unfortunately that's all we've got time for. And thank you for joining us across the ages and for all your questions. We will try and endeavour to send carrier pigeons out to you with answers to the questions we haven't managed to cover, including quite a few questions about spiders and caves. So people have asked, have you named a spider, or did you seek refuge in a what we'd suggest is go to your learned council and ask the people, or go to any of the scriptorians that may have the information there about it. And one of your subjects, Walter Scott, I think he plays a significant part in the creation of what is going to be the story of King Robert the Bruce. So please be sure to leave a comment, and hopefully, God willing, we shall see you again next time that we get our broadband connected to the 1300s. So thank you all very, very much. Be safe. Goodbye.